seen that since university.
Funny, insightful interviews from a watchdog producer. McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight. Here comes McKnight Tonight.
Welcome to McKnight Tonight. Now, here's Rob McKnight.
Hello and welcome to McKnight Tonight. I am Rob McKnight, and this is the show where we cut through the spin and talk about what really matters. What are you having for dinner? Is that what really matters? Oh, I got a laugh from Amanda. That's a good start.
Spaghetti bowl.
Buy a lotto ticket. Buy a lotto ticket. Hey, bit of an announcement. We are taking next week off. Yes, I know you're going to miss us, but we need a week. You know, all this non-money we're not making. We need to take a week off and get our lives in order. So we are taking the week off. What? What?
So good.
Get our lives in order.
Yeah,
we do
right.
need to get our lives
And we've
in
only
order.
got 1 week to do it. Great. Good luck.
Yeah, well, no, we won't have our lives in order by the end of that week, but we're trying. And, you know, Amanda wants me to do tax. She wants me to, you know, maybe have a look for some jobs. You know, bring some money into the house. So, yeah. Speaking of that, if you want to buy me a coffee, buymeacoffee.com/McKnight Tonight. Might help take the pressure off. Every little bit helps. You know, I'm the hardest. I think by the number of hours I work, I probably make about 50 cents an hour.
If you're lucky.
True. But look, while we're off next week, I would like you all to email me if you want to supply our random live shot of the day. I love this idea that we came up with on Monday night, thanks to Spencer Howson. You might remember he provided our random live shot of the day. So I'd like you to email me, rob@tvblackbox.com.au. That is my direct to email address. I don't have any minions taking care of it. That's my email address, rob@tvblackbox.com.au. Be aware though, I'm not great on the email. I miss a lot of
He needs some minions.
It's true. I miss so many emails, but I'm trying. That's part of what next week is about, to see all the golden opportunities from people overseas who are offering me a fortune if I just give them $1,000. I've missed all those emails, so I need to go through them. All right, and look, a little note. You know I'm a media guy, and the 7 Upfronts happened today, but we're not doing any coverage because they didn't supply a live feed. Channel 9 last week, I was able to do a chat with Mog because they supplied a live feed. I could take a look. We could show you some clips. That's not happening with 7, so we're waiting to see whether we will get that access. Mog is there, and he will be doing articles for TV Black Box, but it's hard to talk about something I haven't seen. So, you know, I'll keep you updated with any developments. Maybe tomorrow we'll do something. We'll see that. So that's just for the media guys. And, of course, make sure you subscribe to YouTube. And I will be putting up some little treats next week, including the live stream that I did many, many years ago with the team of the Today Show, Carl Stefanovic, Lisa Wilkinson, Dickie Wilkins, Ben Fordham. I did a whole live stream, went for about 40 minutes. I've come across it in my hard drives. I was going through them all on the weekend, and it's an interesting one, so I'm going to put that up this week while I'm away. All right, I think I've got through everything. Oh look, it's only, you know, 3 past 9, so, you know, I haven't wasted too much time. All right, let's get into our hot topics. This is what's coming up tonight. We'll talk about Choppergate, Victoria's top cop under fire for using a police helicopter for a personal trip to Tasmania. Then cracks appear in the New South Wales Coalition as some Liberal MPs side with the Greens on a plan to shut Pokies after midnight. Plus, top psychiatrist Professor Edward Ogden, he'll join me live to discuss fears ADHD is being overdiagnosed in high-fee private clinics. And later, powerhouse vocalist John Stephan, wait until you hear his voice and his tribute to Roy Orbison. It's a fascinating singer. He is a fascinating singer. It will be a fascinating chat. All that and plenty more on this Wednesday edition of McKnight Tonight. Let's get into our hot topics. And Victoria's top cop has come under fire for a questionable call that's left many shaking their heads. Chief Commissioner Mike Bush personally authorised the use of a police helicopter to fly to Tasmania for a leadership conference. The flight, which critics say should have been done on a commercial airline, sparked disbelief among officers and the public alike. The Herald Sun reports that the aircraft, part of Victoria Police's Air Wing fleet, made the 1,400-kilometre round trip to Hobart last week, even as serious crime response times remain under pressure. 4 in 5 readers in an online poll said Bush showed appalling judgment. And they're right. Look, it's a thrill riding a helicopter. I've done it many times. Working for both 9 and 7, I was lucky enough to do all the aerial shots they used to do. I spent days and days in helicopters, sunrise, sunset, midday, nighttime. It's a thrill. And one time I even got picked up from outside the 7 Broadcast Centre in Melbourne. And do you think I felt like a god getting on that helicopter as it picked me up to take me to a shoot? Absolutely. But this was a private enterprise. And what's going on here is on the public purse. You knew about this conference weeks in advance. There is no excuse for flying from Melbourne to Tasmania for something like this. It's not operational. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't some big task force going on. No, you got your jollies off flying on a helicopter. And apparently they have a private, I say private, but a police force plane that does the same thing. Why isn't this guy flying commercial all the time? Like, I can't think of any conference you need to go to that requires the police plane to be used. Surely, absolutely surely, you should be flying commercial. And if you've got things going on, then you make it work. Now, obviously, if some big thing had happened in the morning and you needed to get to this conference and there had been an emergency that delayed, then fine. Or if some crime broke out and you needed to get to Tasmania or any other part, no one's going to argue with that. But when you're going to a pre-planned event and nothing has precluded you from doing that, you chose to make appointments in the morning and you made the decision. And I think it is an appalling lack of judgment. The question Victorians now need to ask themselves is it a sackable offence? Choppergate, don't say those words to Bronwyn Bishop, they destroyed her career. This is no better. In fact, he flew further. She only went from Melbourne to Geelong from memory. This is a bad lapse of judgment. Now, he'll obviously learn from that. He'll never do it again. But part of me does think, sorry, mate, at a time when we're trying to support our police, you know, we have situations where rocks are being thrown at them and you're just taking the piss. You are just taking the piss by using this helicopter. Police are meant to set an example. You might need to consider that over the next 24 to 48 hours and decide whether you can really hold on to your job.
Here comes McKnight Tonight.
So what do you think? Should he fall on his sword? Let me know in the comments section of this video, or if you're not watching through YouTube, you can do it through Facebook. But if you're on X or LinkedIn, we can't get your comments, and we'd love to hear from you. Genuinely, we'd love to hear from you when we get to feedback. So just go to youtube.com/@McKnight Tonight. That's youtube.com/@McKnight Tonight. All right, moving on. And the corridors of power in Sydney have erupted. You see, a handful of Liberal MPs in the New South Wales division have thrown down the gauntlet. They're siding with the Australian Greens to push a radical shake-up of late-night pokie rules. Now, this bill would force pokies in pubs and clubs across New South Wales to shut down after midnight. But here's the catch. The Nationals aren't on board, forcing a rift in the coalition from coast to country. Some Liberals argue this is overdue reform, saying the midnight shutdown will curb gambling harm and protect vulnerable communities. And of course, others say it's political theatre, and the Nationals warn regional venues will be crushed. I come back to it. Is it illegal? No, it's not. You know, gambling addiction is a real issue, and it is something we need to deal with in our society. But personally, I don't want to be stopped having a flutter. If I'm on a night out, I don't want to be stopped just because it's midnight. I just don't understand this thing why help those who are vulnerable, but we punish the wider community. You see, I can go and put $20 in and have fun on the pokies, knowing I'm going to lose it, then yeah, I might put another $20 in. Just joking, Amanda. Wouldn't really do that. But the point is that I take responsibility for my actions. And that's what we have to keep doing in this society. Take responsibility for your actions. And yeah, we all stuff up. Apologize. You know, I joke McKnight is always right. I'm not always right. Most of the time I am, but there are odd occasions. But the point is, on a serious side, there are things we need to do for problem gamblers. On Monday, we talked about David Pocock raising the issue that gambling companies are contacting people who have self-excluded. That absolutely must be shut down, and they should be fined millions of dollars for doing that. But when it comes to my choices with gambling, I'm 52 years old. I don't need the government telling me what to do. But what about the Liberal Party? They are in, and the coalition, it's in all manner of problems. You know, yesterday in Media McKnight, I covered the Kevin Rudd thing, and I really had some problems with the way some news services, Channel 9, the way they covered it last night in the 6 p.m. news, they didn't give context. They obviously led with the Kevin Rudd stuff, but they didn't give context that he apologized to Trump and Trump said all is forgiven. Channel 7's report was very even-handed. They did a great job. But my point on that is Jane Hume, the backbencher, has come out and, you know, I've been calling out some of the commentary from Susan Lee, who just seems desperately trying to grab onto issues and have a go at the government. And yesterday, when there was this thing with Rudd, that when you watch the video, it's really nothing. And Trump just looked like he was having a bit of fun. And Susan Lee's there. She's holding press conferences saying, well, his position is untenable. He became a joke. He was laughable. He's got to go. Even Jane Hume came out and said her comments, Susan Lee's comments, were churlish. And yesterday, Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister, said, Kevin Rudd and I have had our differences, but he has done a great job in Washington. And he has been widely praised for the work he did making this trip such a success. And it was good to see Anthony Albanese coming out and supporting him. Whatever you think of Rudd, you know, the Australian public might have turned on him, but he is good at this kind of stuff. You know, he makes things happen. And Anthony Albanese has actually stood up and said, no, I support Kevin Rudd. He's done a great job. I don't think Bill Shorten ever did that kind of thing. You know, look, remember Sam Dastyari, as soon as he got in trouble, Bill Shorten was like, mate, you got to go. You can't be in the party. You know, there was no loyalty. And I'm not saying being loyal for the sake of being loyal. I'm saying look at the facts and see what you can survive. And, you know, yesterday was a big success for the Labor Party. But it is good to see people on the right, like Jane Hume, like Tony Abbott, and I'm sitting here saying they did good. And let's not overhype what happened with Rudd. But that just shows the divisions that's going on in the Liberal Party there and the coalition with Barnaby Joyce leaving. There is no, that they are not working as a team. There is no structure. There is no banding together. They are all out going against each other. And that's going to keep Labor in power for many years to come. At this stage, Labor will trounce will trounce the Liberal Party and the coalition in the 2028 election. You just mark my words. But on the pokey front, to get back to the original topic, let adults be adults. We don't need more regulation. We don't need to shut things down. But what we do need to do is help people when they need help and stop these companies from taking advantage of the vulnerable. But let me make my decisions. Let me know your thoughts.
Fun, insightful interviews from a washed up producer with nothing to lose. McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight. Here comes McKnight Tonight.
Well, there's growing concern tonight about the explosion in ADHD diagnosis and whether some Australians are being labelled too quickly and too easily. The Herald Sun reports leading experts, including Professor Edward Ogden, fear the condition is being overdiagnosed in expensive, privately run clinics. They warn some practices are offering fast-tracked online assessments with little follow-up or care, while charging hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars per patient. Professor Ogden says that while ADHD is genuine and often life-changing diagnosis, commercial pressures may be distorting the process, with too many people being medicated unnecessarily. He and other experts are now calling for tougher standards, more training for doctors, and better oversight of private clinics. To find out more, the professor is joining me. Professor Edward Ogden, welcome to McKnight Tonight.
Thank you very much.
Now, you are suggesting we are witnessing an overdiagnosis trend. How big do you think the problem is becoming in Australia?
I actually have no idea. I don't think we have really good figures. We know that ADHD is being diagnosed more often, particularly in adults, than it has been in the past, which could be a really good thing because there are people whose lives are dramatically changed by correct diagnosis and treatment.
And for the record, I am one of them. And I can tell you from personal experience, there was a lot I didn't understand about myself until I had that diagnosis.
Yeah, I think the commonest thing I hear from people when you get it right is it's transformative.
Absolutely. Like it's cost me employment. You know, not understanding why I do or did the things that I did and the way I did them. So I'm intrigued as to, you say you don't know how big this problem is. What are you basing it on? What do you think is leading to this overdiagnosis?
Well, I guess look, the overdiagnosis question is one that's been raised by others. My concern is, in fact, the reverse, that there are some people who desperately need help who can't get it.
Right.
The public mental health system almost universally will not treat ADHD, even when it's very obvious. And so what this means is that we have this social equity issue, that if you've got enough money and you can afford one of the private clinics, then you can get a diagnosis, rightly or wrongly. But if you don't have the money, then it's almost impossible. And the obvious problem that I have is that I may make the diagnosis of ADHD for someone who's in drug and alcohol rehabilitation and successfully commence them on treatment. But then when they leave the area of my practice, I can't find anyone to take them on. Psychiatrists won't treat people who have a history of drug use. There is almost no public clinic to which I can refer people. So I see this as a huge social equity issue. Because as you rightly said, Rob, because people's lives have changed when you get the diagnosis right.
Absolutely. And so it's interesting because the way it obviously came across in the article was that you were basically saying, the experts, the way that article was written was, it sounded to me like, basically people just want a diagnosis and they go and pay for it. I don't think just because you spend all that money, you should be given a diagnosis, but I really take your point. And I think you have a really good point that in this country, mental illness, mental health of any kind is problematic if you don't have the money to go and pay for psychologists and psychiatrists to go and get the help you need. And then there's a waiting list of 6 months or 8 months or a year sometimes.
Yeah, I think it was nicely highlighted by the Royal Commission into Mental Health in Victoria, which talked about the forgotten middle.
Yep.
That there are people who are really profoundly unwell, who are looked after by the public health system, particularly the acute public health system. And there are people whose problems aren't perhaps quite as dramatic, whose problems are reasonably well managed by their general practitioner. And there's this group in the middle who are pretty difficult for a GP to manage and yet aren't sick enough for the public system to look after, and they miss out. That's what the Royal Commission referred to as the forgotten middle. And I think with ADHD, this is a huge issue, that there are people whose lives could be transformed by appropriate treatment but can't access it.
Yeah, indeed. And so the article also spoke about more diagnosis. Does that come from us being more informed? When I was a kid, if you ever saw a story on a current affair, it was ADHD, kids out of control, and it was one of those things, hyperactivity, and you didn't want to be one of those. But we've obviously learnt a
Yeah.
lot more about it now. And as a kid, I never would have thought I was ADHD, but I look back now and realize I absolutely was. So this is a loaded question. Is there more diagnosis because we're more informed, or are we looking for excuses?
And could both of those things be true simultaneously?
Sure.
That I think like all other human characteristics, there's a range, and there are people whose ADHD, if we stick with that diagnosis, is so obviously out of control that I spoke to a young man in rehabilitation earlier this year who said he was expelled from kindergarten. So that's a really extreme example of a little person whose life is severely handicapped by their behaviour, and at the other extreme, you've got people who say, well, I'm a bit forgetful, or I'm a bit impulsive, and I'm a bit fidgety. Could I have ADHD? Well, lots of us have got some aspects of ADHD. We don't all need medication.
So what's the balance here?
Well, I think it's about it, as you said in your introduction, it's about education and awareness. And even if you make the diagnosis that somebody has ADHD, they don't necessarily need to be medicated. That if they're forgetful, they can use compensatory behaviours. They, use the calendar apps on their phone. Set reminders. Fidget spinners are designed for people who can't sit still. It is a matter of, are these characteristics which you have causing significant disability in your life? And if they're not, well, that's interesting. You're a bit forgetful, you're a bit fidgety, whatever. But when you get people who say, look, I've started 10 courses, but I haven't completed anything. I just can't concentrate. I can't do anything. For me, I think if you get a child at, 16, 17 who says, I just can't concentrate in the classroom, that's kind of an urgent problem to help them get their life in order, because, their last year or two at school is crucial. It's not as simple as, we overdiagnose or underdiagnose the condition. It's a matter of being thoughtful about the individual and what have we got to offer that may or may not improve your life.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Your group is calling for more training and national standards for ADHD assessments. What specific reforms would make the biggest difference right now?
Well, you see, they're there. It requires, that the ADHD Professionals Association has published ADHD diagnostic guidelines for Australia. And we've published treatment guidelines, which have been approved by the National Health and Medical Research Council. So the guidelines are there. I have colleagues who have developed courses for training GPs. I help run a course for training psychiatrists. Training is there. But part of it is that, every state and territory is a little different in how they allow access to particularly the psychostimulants.
Yes.
New South Wales and Western Australia have announced they're going to allow GPs to prescribe, but they haven't said anything about which GPs or, do the GPs need some training? Certainly what we've talked about in various ways is that, people prescribing, let's say if we allow GPs to prescribe for ADHD, then they should belong to some sort of peer review group, maybe including a psychiatrist, so that there's some some ongoing thought goes into, are we doing the best thing for these people, not just throwing drugs at them?
That's a very interesting point. And look, from my own personal experience, I am prescribed Ritalin. I don't always take it. If I'm doing a lot of stuff at home, I tend to try, I don't want to be on drugs my whole life. And so I do go off them, and that can sometimes be a bad thing, and I will then get back on them. But I do find Ritalin helps. And I get worried when I see headlines, I get worried that we're now being negative towards people who are being diagnosed with ADHD because it's the big fad. I don't know if it's a bigger problem than it was before. I don't know what's changed. I know from personal experience that diagnosis was life-changing. And when I am on Ritalin, that is life-changing. So I do get concerned that we head down this path of saying, well, we're diagnosing too much, we need to pull it back, but we need to, in my opinion, make sure we pull it back in the right way, making sure the right people still get the diagnosis, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, you can think about this in all sorts of ways. I mean, I think the people with ADHD were probably the hunter-gatherers of thousands of years ago. They were busy. They had to be running around all over the place. They couldn't sit still.
Yeah, that we didn't have phones to distract us then.
Well, and you weren't expected to sit in a classroom or to sit at a desk in a workplace. If you felt like, running off and doing something, no one cared. So, some of it may be an artifact of our modern lifestyle. I mean, I don't know, but what I do see is that if you get the diagnosis right and you get the treatment right, you can see people's lives just transformed from a sense of years and years of being labelled as a failure, you're lazy, you're stupid, to actually, I can achieve things.
Yeah.
One of the first people that, no one taught me this stuff when I was a medical student or as a young doctor. I mean, I've learnt this stuff the hard way and largely from my peer review group. But, one of the first people who I recognised had ADHD as the underpinning of her drug addiction. When I met her, she started and failed 10 courses. The last time I saw her, she was finishing a bachelor's degree. I mean, treatment can be truly transformative and allow people to achieve their true potential. And we know 30% of people in a drug and alcohol clinic have ADHD. It's, depending on which estimate you look at, but 30% of the prison population. I mean, we could allow people to live more fulfilled lives if we get the diagnosis and treatment right. And it's not just drugs,
Sorry, you can tell I haven't had the Ritalin. I'm jumping in. I'm very excited to talk to you.
That's one of the signs, isn't it? Interrupting others when they're talking.
One final thing that I just want to go back to. You said something and it's been playing on my mind. I think you said psychiatrists won't take on patients who've had drug addictions. That's very
Correct.
concerning because presumably I would imagine they're the people who really need help. Are you telling me it is a real situation where psychiatrists won't take those people on as patients?
The commonest thing I hear is, I won't treat you till you've been, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, drug-free. Whereas my clinical experience as an addiction medicine practitioner is that as soon as you treat the ADHD, people stop using drugs.
Yeah. Well, you hear that a lot of people with ADHD use drugs because the stimulant brings them down. It's funny. I try to explain to people with the Ritalin is that it could give you a high, but it evens me out. It has the opposite effect. But it's fascinating.
Well, we know a lot about the neurobiology of that, but basically the ADHD brain is very, very busy. There's lots of things going on. Beautifully described to me by one of my patients a year or so ago who said it's like walking into Harvey Norman and there's a wall of television stations and they're all on different channels and they've all got the volume up and you don't know where to look. If you take your medication, you can pick the one you want to concentrate on.
It's funny. I love that. I'll be here because this is my office as well as my studio, and my wife will come in, and I've got audio playing over there as I'm watching news websites. I'm editing here, and I've got audio going. She's going, "How can you deal with all this noise?" I'm like, "It's good for me." Professor Ogden, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure.
And to me, the biggest takeout is we need to make sure that those who can't afford it can get the diagnosis. I understand everything else you're saying, but that's a big takeout for me.
Well, I think that, look, to me, that's the biggest issue, is this equity issue. You know, I don't know of another addiction practice in the country that treats ADHD as a primary activity other than the one we run here in Shepparton. And that strikes me as being very sad. And so, you know, that's very much part of the way I feel, is this is a huge equity issue. You know, we're constantly approached by people saying, "I don't have a drug and alcohol problem, but could you treat my ADHD?" And the answer, of course, is no. That's not what we're here for. So yeah, it's a huge equity issue, and you know, it's one I think that, you know, requires a policy response. I mean, general practitioners very competently treat lots of mental health issues. When it gets too hard, they call on a psychiatrist. I don't see why ADHD should be any different. It's not in Canada. In Canada, it's treated by ADHD, by GPs, and the rate of ADHD in Canada is no higher than it is in the United States. So it's not as if you can't trust GPs or they're going to overdiagnose.
I agree.
In fact, it's probably the other way around. People will feel a bit uncertain in an area that they're not very comfortable in, and so they'll maybe slow to make the diagnosis.
Very good point. Professor Ogden, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation.
My pleasure.
It's the random life shot of the day. Where are you going today? You'll never know where you'll end up with the random life shot of the day.
And tonight's random life shot of the day comes from Sydney Harbour, where the heat is on. Literally, temperatures across New South Wales have smashed October records today. Penrith and Bankstown both hit around 40 degrees, while Taree saw its hottest October day in 65 years, reaching 40.7 degrees Celsius. Overnight lows stayed 17 degrees above average in some regions, and the Bureau of Meteorology says gusts of over 100 kilometres an hour could make for a dangerous mix tonight. So while locals are cooling off at the beach, authorities are on high alert. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service has declared total fire bans across Greater Sydney, the Hunter, Illawarra and parts of the Central West. Tomorrow, though, will be a cooler day, with the city expected to hit a high of just 22 degrees. That will bring some relief, but there's more heat on the way. We love Sydney. Beautiful place. Love being in Sydney. But let's take a look at the feedback coming through to McKnight Tonight. And Jeanette says, I had buttered chicken and rice. Well, we were talking about what I said. We're having big investigation tonight and into what you're eating. So thank you, Jeanette. Over the page we go. And we've got this one from Beck. I can understand why Amanda fell in love with him, though he said he gives a shit. I understood the first part, Beck. I don't understand the second part, but I think she's wondering why she fell in love with me. Radio Notes podcast says, dinner with McKnight. Make it a night with McKnight. And You're Crazy says, we need a week off too. Do you? Okay. Well, your wish is my command. Beck says, enjoy your week off. Thank you, Beck. I will. We've got a few things to do. Own Your Crazy says, has Rob been blackballed by Seven? I was talking about the lack of live stream from the Seven event. No, not at all. They literally just don't have a live stream of their event, which is they didn't last year either. It just makes it hard to cover. Mulk is there, so TV Black Box was invited. No, nothing like that. Beck says, can you talk about your experience at Seven recently? Yeah, absolutely. I loved working at Seven. Had a great time. The thing is, though, in the role that I do, I will call out the networks, and obviously it was harder while I was working at Seven. because there were conflicts, but anytime that happened, I disclosed it. But obviously, and I was freelance and there's no work there at the moment, and I will talk openly and honestly as I do in Media McKnight and I do here on McKnight Tonight. Maybe that's my problem. Beck says he could just pay economy. This is on the police commissioner who flew in the helicopter into Tasmania from Melbourne. Own You're Crazy says it's called Zoom. Yeah, he could have used Zoom. Very, very fair point. Over the page we go, and we've got Beck says I'm in a non-pokey state, and I think it's one of the best things ever. I'm a no gambler, and I think it's one of the best things, which is great for you, Beck. But if I want to gamble, surely that's my choice. Surely. Over the page we go. Own You're Crazy says coalition MPs with a conscience. I'm shook. Good point. Very good point. Beck again. Rob, whenever you discuss politics, you need to have a dictionary on the side of the page. Is that because I said something? Or did I get something wrong? You'll have to explain that one to me a bit more, Beck. Mikey Spiky 79 says, to be fair to Mike Buss, there was no additional cost to taxpayers for the helicopter Tasmania. It is included in the monthly budget. Perception is the key issue and it showed really poor judgment. I disagree with this. Just because it's budgeted doesn't mean it has to be used. This is a major problem. Oh, well, it's been budgeted there. I'd better take a helicopter to Tasmania. No, save the money, save the public purse. Put it towards a future use where there's, I don't know, maybe a manhunt for a cop killer and you want to use police resources to deal with that. Maybe we just keep the money for those occasions. Own You're Crazy says, bring back the Australian Democrats. They were a true alternative back in the day. There's no doubt about that. We've got this one again from Own Your Own Crazy, talking about ADHD and the mental health issues. My psychiatrist believes the standards for the diagnosis of many conditions has been lowered considerably. Interesting. Over the page we go there, and we've got this one from Beck. It was 2023 when they finally worked out that people with autism could have ADHD. I would have blasted someone that had an intellectual disability. There is nothing wrong with this. However, and I think we've got one over the page there, Amanda. I was told I had an intellectual disability my entire life and there was no support. Well, Beck, you've certainly been through it, and I do love the conversation taking part on our social media, on our YouTube community. You guys open up to each other and it's fabulous. Own You're Crazy says, you became assessed for medical treatment in the hope you don't need it, not the other. You become assessed for medical treatment in the hope you don't need it, not the other way around. Could not agree more. Very well done. And and Jeanette says, totally agree. The forgotten middle, which happens with other medical conditions as well. So true, Jeanette. So true, Jeanette. Keep your feedback coming in this edition of Media McKnight. Rewind that. And 3, 2. Keep your feedback coming to McKnight Tonight. We'll get to more of it very shortly.
Here comes McKnight Tonight.
You know, we've showcased some great performers here on McKnight Tonight, and my next guest really does have something special. But instead of showing a clip, I want you to listen to the audio of my next guest singing, and feel free to close your eyes.
The sea for
Guess what? That beautiful voice doesn't belong to the great Roy Orbison. It actually belongs to John Stephan, who has a tribute show coming about the iconic singer. That's him there, and he's the man behind that voice. And he's right here on McKnight Tonight. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's such an honor.
It is amazing to just listen to that voice. What drew you to Roy Orbison? Is it because you sound like him, or is it because you've trained your voice to sound like him?
Look, I get a lot of people asking if I've had lessons growing up, and and I haven't had any formal lessons, but I always say my parents, the music that my parents listened to, the records of the 60s and 70s, were the people who pretty much taught me everything I know. And I guess when you're 2 and 3 and 4 years old and your parents playing Roy Orbison all day, somehow it tends to teach you to hit those notes and to, I guess, appreciate the emotion and love behind each note that you sing.
Well, this is more than a show that you're doing. It really, from everything I can see, is an experience. And I love this. You're personally endorsed by Roy's son, Wesley.
That's right. It was a huge honour. I was living in America for about 18 years, working and recording. And whilst there, I was asked to sing at the Grand Ole Opry by Vince Gill. And I decided to sing as one of my songs, "Crying" by Roy Orbison. And I think he had a feeling I was going to do that. So he invited the Orbison family over, and they heard it. And they were standing in the wings as I walked off the stage, and from that point we became very good friends. And whenever I get the chance, I just have to do this show because it's working with Wesley and reminding the world how great his dad actually was.
Well, he loves you so much. I've got a quote here. He says, "John Stephan is the only person in the world today that could do justice to my father's music." That is a statement.
It was something that blew me away. We were recording Wesley for some of the video footage for the show. So throughout the show, we have Wesley talking as a voiceover about his dad and telling us little things that most people didn't know. And we originally produced this show for Las Vegas. So we had it on the Las Vegas Strip for a while and did really well there. And so it had to have all that production. But sitting back in the studio and you know, I had my eyes closed listening to everything that was being recorded and said. And when he said that, it was honestly one of the biggest honours I think someone could say, not just because Roy Orbison was so great, but because it was coming from his son.
Well, you've sold over 10 million albums around the world. What connects you and your audience?
I don't know. I think there's so many things in music that can touch people in so many different ways. But because my influences were singers and singers who could really tell stories, not only with the lyrics, but with the tone of their voice, you know, they really had that emotion. I like to think that somehow I guess, been able to do the same thing because I know that's what attracts me to certain types of music and songs. It's the emotion and that raw feeling that is behind each note that's sung, you know. And I think you can tell a great story with that emotion, but if you don't have emotion in what you're singing, no one's really going to listen to that story.
So true. When you're doing a tribute show, do you lose a sense of identity? What's the balance between being yourself and imitating the singing style of someone like Roy Orbison, who you're doing the tribute to?
Yeah, I think you would definitely lose yourself. I find it very difficult to understand how so many people, I guess, devote their lives to doing tribute shows. And when I say tribute shows, in the sense of an impersonation,
Yes. And there is a
things-
difference between a tribute show and impersonating a performer.
Definitely. So this particular show, I only agreed to do it, and to be honest, the Orbison family only put their name behind it on the basis that I wasn't impersonating their dad. You know, I was really singing as John Stephan and saluting the great music that Roy Orbison wrote and sang.
Well, it is great music, and you'll be performing at the Glen Street Theatre in Belrose, New South Wales, on Friday, the 7th of November. So what can people expect from this show?
It's a 2-hour concert. We go through 15 of Roy's #1 hits. And as I said, I don't dress up as Roy Orbison, so don't expect to see an impersonator.
But I have heard you rock a mean pair of sunnies.
Yeah, well, who doesn't like Ray-Ban? I mean, you know, that's definitely a very cool factor there. But my drummer wears the sunnies during the show, so we do throw that in. But you get to experience a lot of stories about Roy Orbison, spoken by his son Wesley. As I said, we go through the 15 number one hits he had and many other songs. And I tell you a few stories as well. On meeting the Orbison family, I recorded my album with the Roy Orbison band, and I became friends with Roy's co-writers, Joe Melson and Bill Dees, and his producers. So, it really was. It wasn't my focus when I was living in the US because I was writing my own music. I have 4 original albums, and as you said, I've been released on many albums around the world and written for
10
other
million
people as well.
album sales you've had. That's a hell of a lot of a hell of a lot of sales.
Yeah, I tell you what, if only money came with that, but we do it for the love. But,
I know the feeling. I know the feeling.
It's the industry, isn't it? You got to do it for the love. But to be able to do this amongst all that original stuff and to be taken back myself to my childhood and listening to that music through my parents, I believe it does actually relate to so many generations, not just the people who today might be 70 years old who grew up in the 60s, but also to their children, like myself, who grew up loving it and appreciating the brilliance in what it was.
Brilliance is absolutely the word. So if people want to see you, they can contact the Glen Street Theatre in Belrose. If you do a Google, you'll find their details. And you can also, we can support you. You've got a Spotify page. You're on Spotify. So we can go and stream your music and help you get that 8 cents that will go towards your fund.
Well, I got an email the other day saying I hit 15 million spins or something, and I believe I've made about $600. So, yeah, for 15 million. Spotify's amazing. But it's the way of the future, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, you seem like a great bloke, and all the footage I see of your concerts is fantastic. So all the stuff you've done in Las Vegas and around the world, it just looks amazing. So I wish you every success. Thanks for joining us on McKnight Tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Here comes McKnight Tonight.
All right, let's take a look at a bit of feedback coming through to McKnight Tonight before we wrap up tonight's show. Becca's come back to me, and Beck said, okay, well, I'll do Mikey Sparky. I accept your point about the budget, Rob. Beck also said that I use big words. I just saw it quickly there. You know what's weird, Beck? I did really badly at school, and I reckon TV gave me my education. So if I'm using big words, it's because I learnt it from TV. So maybe if I learnt it from TV, maybe some people will learn some words here, assuming I'm using them in the right way. Own You're Crazy says, 2 interviews in 1 episode. The budget's been blown tonight. Indeed. Radio Nodes podcast says, making up for next week. Guessing no back end tonight. No, we don't have time for a back end quickie tonight, Radio Nodes podcast. But I will tell you something. I am taking next week off, but when we return, I will have an international celebrity, someone from Star Wars, a big name, will be on McKnight Tonight, and a very well-known, controversial Australian. We've got some interviews lined up. They are coming to McKnight Tonight. I had to take next week off so that I could be here for those interviews. Beck says, Rob, one thing I like about your show is that you bring voices that we wouldn't always get to hear. Thank you. Pleasure, Beck. Pleasure, Beck. And these people are absolutely amazing, aren't they? All right, I have taken up a lot of your time. Thank you for a great night. Let's end the week with a tipsy Thursday. I'll need a wine at the end of this week and before we take the big week off. Thanks for your company. We'll see you tomorrow. As I say, good night from McKnight.
Tonight, McKnight Tonight, McKnight Tonight. It's good night.